Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first session of the AALA's National Summit. I'm Belinda Wong, President of the WA branch of the AALA and Special Counsel in Projects and Arbitration at Cause Chambers Westgarth. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we meet today. I am joining you from the land of the Noongar people from the Whadjuk region. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and recognise that sovereignty has never been ceded. Now I'd like to briefly introduce our three amazing roundtable speakers today. The Honourable Lisa Singh is a former Australian Senator and was the first woman of South Asian heritage to be elected to the Australian Parliament. She is the Deputy Chair of the Australian Government's Australia-India Council and an advisory council member of the University of Melbourne's Asia Link and the University of New South Wales Australian Human Rights Institute. Prior to the Senate, she served as a Tasmanian Member of Parliament and Minister in the Tasmanian Government. Lisa's parliamentary career focused on the promotion and protection of human rights, foreign policy, international development, and multiculturalism. Welcome. Now, Cheryl Chan has over 20 years' experience as a lawyer, specialising in employment and discrimination law. She currently runs an employment law and investigations business, Remotely Legal. Cheryl is on the board of WA Health Support Services and the Cancer Council of Western Australia. Previously, she's chaired the BP Refinery Kwinana Board and served on the boards of 100 Women and the Inner North Community Foundation. In 2020, Cheryl was named Senior Lawyer of the Year by the AALA, and in 2019, she was named Woman Lawyer of the Year by the Women Lawyers of Western Australia. Cheryl was recognised as a leading employment and safety lawyer by Doyle's Guide in 2020 and 2021. Welcome. Last but not least, Molina Asthana is National Vice President of the AALA and was one of its founding members. She is the principal of Swarup Asthana Lawyers, practicing in commercial law and litigation. Molina serves on a number of boards, including the boards of several NGOs working on issues affecting South Asian communities in Australia. Molina also speaks on SBS Hindi radio and writes for Indian Australian publications on a range of legal issues. Molina has been consulted on the drafting of privacy laws in India and was acknowledged as an expert in the report accompanying the draft Indian Financial Consumer Protection Code, which she helped draft. She's also the president of the Victorian chapter of the International Law Association and the deputy chair of the International Law section of the Law Institute of Victoria. Welcome, Molina.
Thank you.
So you can read a lot more about our speakers on our event hub and in our national conference program if you want to learn more about these ladies. So to get started, today we're discussing the dual identities of women of colour in this session as women and people of culturally diverse backgrounds. Sometimes the impact of those two identities is more than the sum of their parts. What are your experiences and observations and how these two identities affect navigating in Australian society? And maybe what are some obstacles and challenges you've experienced? So it's quite a lot there. I might ask Lisa to kick off our discussion.
Thank you so much, Belinda. And I am so pleased to be part of this AALA Cultural Diversity Summit with an esteemed panel that I'm joining of other Asian women leaders. So thank you very much for having me, and let's see how we can unpack a bit of that question today. You know, I think in a way it's like having to break through two glass ceilings, really. The fact is, as a woman and a woman from a culturally diverse background, we are not yet seen as a critical mass. And I think for me, my first experience of that was growing up in one of the least culturally diverse Australian states in the country, Tasmania. I think, in fact, when I grew up in Tasmania, you could fit most of the Indian community in Tasmania at that time into one family home. and that often happened. So I did not have a concept of my own cultural identity growing up externally. I only had it internally, when I spent time, at home with my dad, learning about that part of my cultural identity. So I think from my experience, it's hard to be what you can't see. And so growing up, I wanted to be more Australian, really, and less Indian. And I was, in a sense, denying half of my own heritage in that process. And in fact, as a young woman, I left Tasmania and lived in Sydney and Melbourne, and I actually felt more at home in those big cities because there were more people in those cities that looked like me. But in terms of being a young woman on top of that, I did go to an all-girls school. So I was, surrounded by girls all day and women teachers and the like, but I wasn't encouraged to take leadership roles. In fact, the sorts of careers were only sort of professions that were already fairly predominantly female that were sort of put forward, and politics was certainly not one of those. But I think we need to reflect on the fact that, this was the 1980s and a lot has changed since then across the entire country, thanks to a number of, female trailblazers who have made the path a little bit easier for us women. So I do think we're a lot more diverse today and inclusive as a country in all Australian states, thanks also to the migrants that have settled outside of those major capital cities. But for me, when it came to leadership roles, I was often the only person of colour in the room. And there was very little or no recognition of cultural diversity in leadership roles in the advocacy or political systems that I belonged to. And I think those attitudes on race and prejudice for me played out in my first election campaign in 2006. So one of those was where I had red dots placed on my forehead on all of my election posters. And then someone also then put red paint on my forehead of the picture of the office that I'd hired, which was followed by a brick that was thrown through the glass window, shattering my face that was in the window. I also had another candidate who was obviously running against me knock on doors, encouraging people to not vote for me, as I wasn't going to get elected anyway because I was Indian. So despite all of that, I did not let it waver my resolve of what I knew I could bring to the political stage. It just made it that little bit more important that I stood, but also that little bit more harder. But what played out for me is that people did take me for who I was and elected me ahead of the racist candidate who lost. And that gave me incredible faith in my community, that they themselves wanted greater diversity, that despite the lack of cultural diversity within my community, I was not living in a racist community. And then as far as being a young woman on top of that, I guess as a woman, I didn't experience as much prejudice. And I think that is because women in politics have become more of a critical mass. There are simply more of us. And I think that visibility really breaks down barriers. But I think all of this experience for me, Belinda, really reinforced in my mind that multiculturalism was really just a term and not a lived experience for people of culturally diverse backgrounds. And I think we need to, put all of that, of my experience, against the backdrop that, I was born the year the White Australia policy was only just ending. So, we have had a long history of racism in this country, and it's only been 49 years since that policy ended, declaring my age today. So when I was elected to the Tasmanian Parliament, though, it carried on, and I was the only member in the Tasmanian Parliament from an Asian background. Then when I entered the Australian Parliament, I was the only one of 4 parliamentarians of an Asian background. So I think all of that shows that this needs to change. and that we do need stronger cultural diverse representation across all aspects of leadership in our Australian society.
Molina, Cheryl, do you want to share your experiences and your thoughts?
Sure. Firstly, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And to say thank you also to the AALA for inviting me to speak today. It's a real privilege to be here. And like Lisa said, with such an esteemed panel. I'm slightly shocked from Lisa's comments. My experience probably is slightly different in the sense that same and different. I also spent a lot of time growing up downplaying or almost denying being Asian in order to fit in. So, it's really heartening to hear that from Lisa and others like, Pauline Yao, who has said, she had similar experiences. I would make my parents give me, white bread and ham sandwiches instead of, delicious fried rice or something, because that was just the worst possible thing you could bring to school. And the contrast, I think, and how we've evolved, my kids demand that. They want that. They're like, how can I make sure the paratha is fresh when I get to lunch? Or how can I make sure it's still warm? Whereas I'm like, I don't know, I just make a sandwich, So I think things have changed quite a bit. I think as a young female Asian lawyer, in some ways the stereotype helps because there's a perception that you're hardworking, that you get stuff done. That doesn't mean that. So I think in that sense, it was more probably the female aspect, which was a bigger factor. I would take the young male vacation clerk with me to a client event and the client would just talk to him the whole time, thinking he was the lawyer and I was the work experience student. As I became more senior, you add in having kids, add in having working part-time and having family responsibilities. I would have a partner come in and say, part-time people just don't get leadership roles, it just doesn't happen. I'm not talking about you, but just generally, this sort of thing. So I'd probably say my experiences are probably more subtle than Lisa's. It's more what didn't I get, what promotions, jobs, roles did I get overlooked for because of stereotypes, particularly in those more senior leadership roles. Thanks.
Thanks, Cheryl. Molina?
Yeah, thanks, Belinda, for the kind introduction. And thank you, Lisa and Cheryl, for joining us at this summit. We're very privileged to have you here. I guess all our journeys are similar in the sense that we've all faced the double glazed glass ceiling. For me, I started my journey in India, and at that point, it was more of probably just a glass ceiling. But when I moved to Australia, it became the double glazed glass ceiling for people because I had to face the issues that's faced by people of color as well. So when I arrived in Australia, I did a master's of law degree at the University of Melbourne, fortunately completed with good grades. However, when I started applying for jobs, I was told that my Indian degree and experience were not worth much. Recruiters said that it was unlikely that I would get a job at a top tier or a mid firm, so I should apply for smaller firms. A well-wisher even told me that I should change my career. And but being a determined person, I guess stubborn as well, I chose to keep pushing, keep applying, and keep talking to people. I guess unlike what Cheryl shared, I had a sense of belief in myself, and I was proud of my heritage. When I came to this country, I knew what I brought with me. So I wasn't trying to change that. When I found recruiters, reluctant to put my CV forward, as I lacked the local education experience, I started finding out ways to get appointments and interviews directly with partners of firms. And when I did get an appointment, I would impress upon them the value that my unique skill set and experience would bring to the organization. In the meantime, I also applied to get accredited to practice and was asked to do a few subjects and 6 months of training, and my perseverance finally paid off. And I interviewed, I got a job at Clayton Youths at a top tier firm. They even agreed to give me time to do my subjects. And I got the experience of working with a partner who was not only a brilliant lawyer, but was empathetic to my situation and saw my unique skill set had value in the Australian market. I then moved to another top tier and then to the government. Interestingly, when I was working at one of the top tiers, I got a call from a recruiter who had predicted I would never get a job at a top tier, informing me that he had an opening at a boutique firm. When I told him I was at top tier, he nearly collapsed. So now I do share my journey at forums like these, and I hope I can inspire others. What's really struck me in my time here is that diversity is not valued in the legal profession as compared to some other professions, maybe because it's a hierarchical structure, historically has been that. So how do you overcome these challenges? You're working, I did get jobs at big firms and government, but you still kind of, you're still trying to prove yourself, prove people who said that you could never get a job, that you can do well. There's an unconscious bias that you face every day when colleagues only speak to you to find out who gave you the work. And it's very difficult to change these cultures overnight. But that's what I decided to do. I said, I will challenge these systems. And first thing, I got a toxic culture. I moved to the government. And I have my own practice, and I'm really, really happy that I've been able to do that. And then I started doing work on challenging the social systems and to pierce this ceiling, advocating at various forums. I'm the first person, Indian born as a vice president of Law Institute in 165 2 years of its existence. So I do believe we can all make a change through the work that we do. We have to challenge these systems. That's really what a leader should be doing, and we all can, as all of these women, all of us on this round table as well are doing. So hopefully we can inspire others to do the same.
Great, thank you all. Well, that takes us very neatly into my next question, which is, what are some advantages or special perspectives women of colour bring to leadership roles? I might kick this one off to Cheryl to start off.
Sure, thanks, Belinda. It's a loaded question, but I think we should take a step back here, because if you think about what leadership is and what leaders on an executive team or a partnership or a board, they need to work well together, right? Otherwise it doesn't work. And we're all biased towards people that look like us, that think like us, that get our jokes. I think that's just a reality. So good leadership choices are much more nuanced than just ticking a box to say, yes, I've got some women here, and I've got an Aboriginal person, and I've got an LGBTI person, and I've got an Asian person, and I've got someone with a disability. I think it's more than that. It's about finding people who think differently. It's about finding people who have different life experiences and bring different skills, different professional experiences to the table, but that also have shared values that are aligned with the organisation and have a shared purpose for how they conduct themselves and how the organisation conducts itself. So it's actually quite a hard thing to get right. And I think back to your question about, what do women of colour bring to leadership roles, in some ways, it's sort of the most important and least important factor. For example, the way I look, how I've grown up, all the family, cultural, gendered rituals I've experienced is the frame in which I've seen and experienced the world. It's also how I'm perceived in this world, and therefore how I've interacted with other people. So I do bring that, unique life perspective and experience. But I also think it's not enough. That you have to bring other things to the table beyond that. And a bit like Molina said, what is your unique selling proposition? What else do you bring to the table? Whether it's your skills, your experience, your professional associations, your networks, other skills such as influencing, negotiation, dealing with conflict, those sorts of other skills. It's all of those mixed in as well. And I think the key for leaders and decision makers is to say, well, hang on, am I getting a broad perspective and a broad way of thinking on my leadership team or board or partnership beyond just ticking that box? Thanks, Belinda.
Great. Lisa, could we hear from you next?
Well, I think Cheryl has answered the question. To be honest, she's really summed it up in a really broad way. I think it is clearly the fact that we are all defined by our experiences. Now, that's the case whether you're a woman from a culturally diverse background, or you're a woman who's not from a culturally diverse background. We are all defined by our experiences, but clearly we do as women of colour have a unique value proposition, and that is the fact that we have this incredible cultural experience we've grown up with, and it's all different. I mean, you've heard today from Molina, who migrated from India, from Cheryl's story about the white bread sandwiches, my own story, all our experiences, again, are different on top of that, yet they all help define the sorts of character and values that we bring to the table, whether it's at the boardroom or at the political level or at the, in any sort of legal profession. So, that makes us, it makes us very unique. But as Cheryl said, it has to be more than that. And, I think part of that is looking at, I do talk a lot, about the importance of improving our capability through inclusion, how, inclusion is so important. And the reason I raise that is because of where, thinking of the bigger picture of, where Australia finds itself. We are a country that is part of the Asian region, so we need to be so much more better equipped to be able to engage in this region, in this multifaceted world. And that means having a diversity of worldviews at the table. And that means having women of Asian backgrounds at the table. It's really quite frankly a no-brainer. If we are going to be a independent, multicultural nation that is defining our place in the world, we need to aspire to include all of us. And, there is just so much strength in inclusion. It enriches us, obviously, as a nation, but also in our region and particularly, on the world stage. And I just don't see us doing that well at the moment. I think we need to do it a whole lot better in terms of our representation as Asian Australian women leaders. And, through that, the benefits will be huge because we do bring something very unique.
Great. Molina, do you have anything to add to those very comprehensive answers?
Yeah, I will add a bit from by giving some examples, I suppose, because I've seen that happen. I totally agree with what Lisa and Cheryl have said about the diversity, what value diversity brings, and also a lot of women of diverse backgrounds are well qualified, hardworking, and conscientious. I'm not saying that Anglo-Saxon women aren't, but sometimes they try and fit in and emulate the same behaviors as what men, and because that sustains them in leadership positions. We choose to be different sometimes. For example, I'm the only woman and only person of color on an AFL board, and the rest of them being men who have been associated with the sport for 20, 30 years. In fact, I'm the only person of color on any AFL board. So I've never played the game, nor did I grow up watching it. But on the board table, I'm able to bring in fresh perspectives on how to grow the game. And my governance experience is valuable to the board, as most of them don't have that. And I have legal expertise as well. When I joined the board, the other board members were a bit quite skeptical and a bit surprised. But last year, when I led the board through significant governance changes that were necessitated because of COVID, and the departure of both our general manager and the chair, they were very happy to let me take the lead and guide them through the process because of my expertise and I suppose the trust that I have gained over time. And diversity to me also leads to further diversity. So if you have more people of color in leadership positions, then slowly that brings about a change in the overall makeup of the organization as well, including in senior ranks. So for another example, I chair a committee of a board that I sit on, and we were looking for an external member. We advertised through various channels, and we got a few applicants. The company secretary, in consultation with the CEO, presented me the CVs of 4 candidates, suggesting 2 of them should be interviewed. One of the 4 candidates was a person of color, but they were not recommended to be interviewed, even though their credentials were fabulous. When I asked the question, I was told that the person had already had too many commitments. I found that really surprising, as the same seemed to be true for all other applicants. So I insisted that I interview that person as well, because if we have a very capable person of a diverse background, I would definitely like to interview them as a minimum. Long story short, that person was the best candidate out of the lot, and I wasn't the only one that came to the conclusion. The whole interview panel did. And due to unconscious bias in the selection process, we may have missed out on a brilliant candidate. So diversity of thoughts, beliefs, and expressions that come with diverse backgrounds are really important in any setting.
Well, great. Once again, that leads us very well on to our next question. So you've mentioned that diversity of thought, diversity of experience might leaven out some of the effects of unconscious bias in the hiring process. So what else do you recommend that we implement from here? So what other practical things can we do to improve diversity in leadership roles? Well, Molina, since you're on a roll, I might get you to keep going on this one.
Thank you. People might get sick of hearing my voice, but I'll start anyways. I guess quotas and targets are important. I really think they are. For example, the equitable briefing policy, which commits an entity to making all reasonable endeavors to brief, select, or recommend women barristers with relevant seniority and experience or interest in the relevant practice has really worked well. When I was at the Victorian Government Solicitor's Office, we used that, and we signed on to that, and we did see a difference in who we were briefing. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Rooney Rule that originated in rugby in the US, which makes it mandatory that at least one person of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic background be interviewed for a position, but without making it compulsory to recruit them. That creates an additional opportunity for diverse candidates to be interviewed, identified, and ultimately hired when a vacancy becomes available. Those organizations or practitioners who don't believe in quotas or targets should at least be implementing this rule. Also, organizations should report on cultural diversity in addition to gender equality. Accountability is really important. A plan is as good as the paper it's written on. If there's no KPIs, simply ticking the box is not going to cut it. But for women of color, if you get an opportunity, but my advice to women of color, if you get an opportunity because you're ticking the box, take it. Making a change from inside is much easier. Also, start addressing, I think organizations start addressing inclusion from a social impact perspective rather than a public relations perspective. Only then we will get effective strategies. Unconscious bias training by LCA is a good one for law firms and practitioners seeking to address the unconscious bias in their organizations. Also, don't think of D&I as a role of human resources. It should be embedded in your strategy and as an agenda item on boards in all the policies, in the work culture and overall structure of the organization. But there should be safe and appropriate channels for reporting and for grievance management for people of color who do want to report any untoward behavior. Showcase diversity, highlight the great work these women are doing, but don't keep showcasing the same people over and over again, because that perpetuates the belief that there's only few of us who are capable, which is not the case. Also, this last thing, advice for women of color, be proud of your heritage, because that's your asset. We all get the imposter syndrome in life. I've got it multiple times, but believe in yourself. Grab opportunities as they come, be vocal, challenge systems that create, maintain, and perpetuate inequalities, because to lead, you have to challenge. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Cheryl, do you want to share your thoughts?
Sure. I've probably got 3 suggestions across 3 different levels. So if I think about the first one is, if you recall, in a gender equality push, there was this sort of 40-40-20 structure, 40% male, 40% female, 20, whoever falls in that. And look, it's not where it should be, I don't think, in terms of gender equality, but if you look at the last 5 years, we've actually made a lot of strides in that space. And I think the challenge now is to incorporate the other strands of diversity into that. And I don't mean, okay, let's do culture now, let's do cultural diversity now. And then after we've done that a bit, let's do age. And then after we've done that a bit, let's do LGBTI. And then after that, it's not a hierarchy of strands, so to speak. I think if we can challenge to get all of those strands in that type of framework, that would be a big step. My second call out is probably for the legal leaders in the room, and it's to think about what are the structures, what are the practices, what are the policies of your organisation that either help or hinder diverse perspectives. So, for example, do you only promote based on billing numbers, even though there is someone there that actually is the glue that keeps that team together? Do you only ask the women to do the sort of office housework in your organisation? Or do you bond as a firm or a team only at Friday night drinks? You know, who can't go to Friday night drinks? Is it parents? Is it people who, for religious or cultural reasons, don't drink alcohol, for example? You know, think about those sorts of things, even simple things like when you put on a seminar. I've been asked to do seminars on, you know, balancing and working women, and it's always at 5:30 or 8 a.m., which, you know, I kind of understand, but at the same time, it's the worst possible time as a parent, but also for the people that want to hear it, you know. So just think about these sorts of things, which are, you know, seemingly neutral, but have a different effect on people. And then I think my third strand is really for everyone else. It's not enough to just be passionate about diversity. You need to be taking active, intentional steps. And that might mean you amplify minority voices. So you say, oh, just building on what Lisa suggested in that meeting, or that was a really great idea, Molina. You know, ask questions. You know, why does the leadership team not look like the rest of the community? You know, what is our gender pay gap? You know, ask those questions. And I think if you don't know the answer, you're never going to address it. You know, representation does matter. And I just wanted to end with my favourite quote. This is from Shonda Rhimes, who is the showrunner for the Bridgerton series. And she said, I am not lucky. You know what I am? I am smart. I'm talented. I take advantage of the opportunities that come my way, and I work really, really hard. Don't call me lucky, call me a badass. So my final advice is be a badass.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Lisa, do you want to answer this question?
Yeah, well, look, following from Cheryl, I've got to try and be a bit of a badass. I think we all are. But look, you know, Molina and Cheryl have given really, really good practical policy ideas, really, in how we can address this lack of representation of female Australian leaders and making sure that their voices are heard and included. It's pretty much all there, but I'd probably just add to it that for me personally, I see that if I have a platform as a leader in Australian society, then I think I should use it to inspire others, to represent others like me so that they can realise their own potential. So I think what I'm getting at is being a role model, but also playing a role as a mentor. And I think mentorship is so valuable and so important. Asian Australian role models are just so important for supporting each other and can make us all stronger in the process. And, you know, we've heard today from all of us the opportunities for, you know, Asian Australian leadership, female leadership as well is just enormous. And, you know, I feel that I should and I want to play a role to help ensure we fulfil that potential. I think the other thing is to identify and celebrate champion Asian leaders amongst us. And, you know, we recently just had the 40 under 40 most influential Asian Australian Awards, amazing cohort that was announced, and they are all just so inspiring. I think that is a program that is, you know, just really changing this conversation. It's been going for a few years now, that it's run by AsiaLink and the ANU and PwC and Johnson Partners. I think those sorts of initiatives are really important. They help reshape the debate on the underrepresentation of Asian Australians in leadership positions, but they also at the same time celebrate the powerful contributions that we are all making as leaders. And then I think in terms of the legal profession, I think legal industry groups themselves need to collect more accurate data. I think there's a real lack of data on cultural diversity in leadership in Australia. And it's only through, you know, accurate data that we will be able to, you know, measure targets for how far we are developing in terms of leadership. So I really think I'd encourage all legal professions to collect accurate data. And I think also, businesses and which are, law firms can also develop talent management plans which really help Asian Australian leaders to become leaders, to, into those leadership positions. And finally, Belinda, I just want to say that my advice would be to try and, for those emerging Asian Australian women out there who want to step up into leadership positions, try to live up to your own sense of self-confidence and allow that confidence to grow. But at the same time, learn how to become agile, resilient and adaptive, because let's face it, if the system is biased, but don't lose that sense of who you are, of the value of the diversity that you bring, because that is your power.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. So we're on to our Q&A session next, and I can see a range of questions coming through. Okay, so there's one on intersectionality. So there's now an awareness that discrimination might be compounded by race and gender for women of colour. How do we get more support and allyship from our non-diverse sisters as well as men? I think, Molina, you're eager to answer this one.
Thanks. I guess I was going to answer the question on because there's been a question raised on why white women also, we sort of pitted against white women as well, and there's no support there. And I just wanted to mention, just briefly say that, pitting women against, having less seats on the table is really a problem. When you have that few seats on the table, or you don't have a greater share of the pie, everyone's going to fight for the same post and same position. And that's why I see many women also getting overly protective of their positions, or men also not letting more women in, because that's just the same number of people. Unless we increase the share of the pie, I think, or the number of seats on the table, that is going to continue to happen. And also, this excessive focus on gender equality creates greater inequality for women of diverse backgrounds. We were speaking where quotas and targets are set for gender equality. There's no such quotas for cultural diversity. So organizations appear to have met their goals for diversity if they have appointed enough women in leadership positions, but that completely ignores the need for an intersectional approach to diversity. So I'll give you a very recent examples. On one of the boards that I sit on, recommendations for appointments to another statutory body were made, and 3 white women and 1 white man were recommended by the nominations committee. And when I asked why no person or woman of color were considered, the response I got was that the mandate from the statutory board was for gender equality only, which to me was quite a shocking response. I have now recommended that the nominations committee change its terms of reference to include a requirement to at least consider other strands of diversity when recommending appointments. So you see these kind of inherent biases all the time within organizations that create a problem. And when we don't think about it as a systemic issue, and we look at things one thing at a time, we're not going to solve the issue, as Cheryl had said before as well.
Okay, great. So we're getting a lot of questions, so I might just move on to another interesting one that's popped up. So do you think a recent reference check as a requirement for the hiring selection process should not be asked for mothers re-entering the workforce? Cheryl, your background is in employment. You might have some ideas.
I would expect that by the time you're getting to a reference check, you've probably been through an interview. So you've explained the circumstances of what might be perceived as a gap in your CV because of parent responsibilities. So I would expect that would be taken into account. Just as an aside, I don't think a gap to take time off to be a parent is a lack at all. If anything, being a parent for me makes me a better lawyer and a better board director now, because I think, there's nothing more humbling than carrying your child and being vomited on in the middle of office works and, you know, and then suddenly, you know, putting your hand up to answer a question in a meeting or ask a question or, you know, applying for a job where you only meet 70% of the criteria just doesn't seem that hard after you've had other experiences. And I think that's the kind of that life experience I was talking about that you bring to the table and, you know, make it clear in your interviews.
So we have one more question, which I might direct to Lisa. It's quite a contemplative one. Is there anything you would tell your younger self? What do you wish you'd known 10 years ago or more?
Oh my goodness, that is very, very sort of almost existential. Look, I think I would tell my younger self to feel more grounded and centered in my own identity and who I am, and not feel pressured by these external you know, forces in my own environment, to not deny my own cultural identity, to actually embrace it and see it as a force for good and a force for change. And, you know, to sort of recognize that what that brings is your own self-confidence, your own self-awareness, and your own ability to actually change society for the better, to ensure that more diverse voices can be heard, that, you know, a homogenous society is not, you know, one that's going to bring the greatest strengths amongst us. And it's certainly not the sort of society that we live in anyway. So, yeah, just step up. I guess I have stepped up, but, you know, it's taken a while. And yeah, I really hope that for the next generation, for my children and their children, that it's going to be that little bit easier because of the leadership roles that Molina and Cheryl and myself and so many women of Asian background that are out there today, you know, breaking down that bamboo ceiling, are doing every day.
Thank you so much. Well, that's all we have time for, but thank you for your thoughtful and really honest and quite beautiful answers to my questions today. Lisa, Cheryl, Molina, thank you for giving up your time. I'm sure you've given all of our attendees a lot of food for thought. We do have a lot of questions, so they might be coming your way